Hi, everyone. Welcome to Lean Startup. And this is a meetup where we talk about all the things that startups need to know other than the pitch, with the focus on customer development. And I'm Roy. I've been a member of the Seattle Angels Conference, as well as angel investor with Keiretsu, and the host for Lean Startup. And today, we have a special guest, Gage Clark, who will be talking about sales. And so I will pass it on to Gage.
Awesome. Thank you, Roy. Roy made the critical mistake, which I don't think he'll soon again make, which is giving the microphone to a sales guy. So I am so excited about this. So you guys will be hopefully somewhat, Roy, I don't think I can share my screen.
Let me change that.
Oh, thank you. So yeah, it'll be hopefully a good and productive, busy about hour and 15 minutes. And let's get started. Let me try this again. Okay, can you guys see everything?
Not yet. Okay, there we go.
I can see it.
Let's see, slideshow. Okay. Okay, perfect. All right, guys, so we are going to start. This is the scary sales guys, disarming your discomfort by unmasking the basics of sales. And let me tell you up front, it is no fun to use the word guys without it in and of it itself being a guise. So what that means is this is not going to be a scary themed sales presentation. No, nonsense. We're not doing that because I don't want you guys to think that sales is scary. So let's get into it. Introductions, a little bit of background. So I'm Gage. My name is Gage Clark, and I am a medical device sales rep. I've been doing that for about the last 7 years. This little guy up here, this is the hospital I started in way back in the day as a volunteer nurse's aide. Just sharing that because it's something that I'm always, I don't know, super happy about, glad for the experience. After that, I went to school at the University of Wyoming, and I studied sociology. I really liked that because that was about people and organizations and things like that, which I feel is really relevant to sales, even if we don't use the hard curriculum in it. After that, I started working in medical sales right out of school. So I started with a company called Apria Healthcare, and we did a lot of sleep and respiratory care as well as ventilators. And then I moved on to Philips Healthcare out here in Seattle. And then I did my master's in project management, and then I held a dual role as a project manager within Philips. So nowadays I am a solopreneur, if you will. So I do independent sales consulting. That's the icon for my consulting company. That's me. Whoop, whoop. It's not because I type too many smiley faces in my emails, even though that's what people think, but that's okay. So both with the direct sales representation, I represent manufacturers, and then with the indirect, it's just helping with sales structuring, just, I don't know, general things around sales with people. So I wanted to run into a group intro real quick. So if everybody could just go around real quick, take maybe 15 seconds to introduce yourself, your company, and then maybe where you're at in the sales process or a challenge you have.
May I go first, Gage? And I'm going to ask if you'd like to move it out of the notes section. We can see all of your.
Goodness, thank you.
Yeah,
Okay.
which is why I said let me go first.
That's great.
I did send you a chat on it, but so I'm Elizabeth Cross-Nickel, and I know a few people here. My interest is in health, and that's how Gage and I got connected when he started coming to our APIS Health Angels education sessions. And so I'm delighted to be here. We are a startup, just like other people in terms of running. So I have one that I have a reperfusion injury company, and that's a startup, but also APIS Health Angels is a startup in terms of broadening our exposure to others who might be interested in joining us for angel investing, or for founders who would like to come for money.
Okay. Let's see, Jason, do you want to go next?
Yeah, I'll go. Hi, my name's Jason Kerfus. I started a company called Vivid Microscopy. which is a chemical supply company focused mostly on preclinical drug development and facilitating drugs through the pipeline. At this point, companies had some preliminary sales and some proof of concept. We've had some internal validation as well as external validation, and are in the process of getting our first third-party article coming out probably end of June timeframe into a industrial journal for my area. As far as what I'm interested in and challenges I'm facing, I have quite a bit of customer data. I'd like to try to figure out how to translate that data into more sales, and really pretty much get the word out about my product, and kind of how to kind of go about starting a sales process outside of the initial groups that I've purchased.
Okay, who wants to go next?
I can go ahead and go. My name is Rahul Vasisht. I started an ed tech company called StatRookie. And what my interests are is basically expanding the company, getting more sales, finding more customers. And yeah, I'm always interested in learning about sales tactics. So that's why I'm here.
Okay, I'll go. I'm Larry Brader. I'm co-founder of Quandrus Incorporated, and I'm co-inventor of a new technology called the Quandrus Lens. And we are up to, we think of us as a pre-seed. We have a prototype, and I'm onboarding clients and adding value to them. For example, one of them we're hooking up 5 different databases, genetic databases, and they normally would spend $200,000, and we can do it in a day. And I'm learning how to make money on this. So I'm trying to figure out what the minimum valuable service is and how to charge for it. So we're trying to figure out how to take those clients and actually change them so that we can get some money out of this. Thanks.
Okay, are we missing anybody?
Bert Hamner.
Bert?
Hi, everybody. I'm Bert Hamner here in Seattle, and I'm a clean energy entrepreneur with a number of things going on. And the one that's relevant today is I'm working with an online education company teaching certified public accountants about sustainable business, because sustainability accounting has become a huge deal for big corporations. And we are working on our messaging for the community out there, and it's really challenging to sell this product called sustainability accounting education, because sustainability managers, of which there are a lot here in Washington state, that there's over 100,000 people now on LinkedIn that identify as sustainability managers. 100,000. And so when we say sustainability accounting to them, they think we're talking about real accounting, like the stuff that CPAs do, and they don't like it because they don't understand the technical aspects of accounting. And the CPAs don't think they have anything to do with sustainability. So it's an interesting problem of how to present the product to 2 markets, neither of which think that they're the ones that are actually supposed to work on this stuff. And it's a big problem because a lot of big companies in particular, well, 95% of the Fortune 1000 companies now are doing sustainability reports. They're publishing them. And the problem is that their staff have no idea what they're supposed to be doing. They don't know what it means. And so as a consequence, we're trying to bring education through the CPA community, because they have to take 40 hours of education on topics every year.
Sure.
Okay. So our courses are accredited. Anyway, I'll shut up there, but yeah, it's a very interesting challenge. 2 different markets and how to produce sales messages that work.
Okay, fun stuff. Let's see, anybody else, or are we all good?
So I'm John Seacrest. I think everybody here knows me, but my current project is the Transatlantic Angel Conference, which will start next week, assuming we get enough participants. But the goal is to get are 99% of people who are accredited to wake up to the possibility of writing checks. So we've been doing a reasonable job.
Okay. Awesome. Well, it seems like we've got kind of a wide variety of people and different reasons for being involved in sales. So what I will say about the conversation that we'll have and this presentation is there will be a slight B2B emphasis on a lot of this, but I tried to keep the principles broad enough to where it's applicable to all sales. But a lot of the examples, or some of the examples, will go B2B. So let's pop into this part real quick. This is a different type of presentation that you'll see me do, in the sense that typically I would do a sales presentation. This is going to be structured way different. So please don't construe any way that I present or anything that I do here as how somebody should be doing something in a sales presentation, because these are way different things. This is about delivering information where, you know, we'll learn about sales being, you know, a whole bunch of different things. The other thing, kind of a precursor to all of this. So thinking of sales and marketing, I like to think of them kind of on a spectrum. So we have sales on one end and marketing on the other, and they're both very important, but you know, you can be at various places in that spectrum. So as far as sales and marketing goes, I'm definitely way further on the sales side. So if I speak to marketing things, know that it comes from a sales perspective, just as, you know, marketers may speak to sales things. Third thing I want to say real quick. So sales, I like to think of it as a practice. So even though I may be saying things, I need to take ownership in that it's a practice. I make mistakes every single day. Even if you guys get really good information or take something away from this, you'll still make mistakes. It's kind of like with law school or with doctors, they say practicing law, practicing medicine because you make mistakes. Sales is no different than that. So it's something that is constantly iterative. You evolve, you make your mistakes, but then as a skill, you keep making mistakes to keep those skills sharp. So there again, just because I may say something or do something doesn't mean that I'm by any means perfect at it. And I will also note that I know tons of salespeople that I think are better salespeople than me, or that I look up to. So there again, don't take this as the word or that I do all of these things. I try my best, and I hope you guys all do too with your sales. So quick things, ways to engage. So if you guys have any questions, if you could just, you know, raise your hand on the feature or the chat feature, and then I will keep an eye on that. And whenever we come to an okay stopping point, we can stop and kind of parse things out, discuss them a little bit more. If you guys need to run to the bathroom or anything, great. If, you know, anybody needs to mute, we'll just handle that real quick and just let you guys know. About midway through, we can stop, or a little bit more than midway through, we can stop for a quick 2-minute break if we need to. I'll ask you guys if we need to. We'll just, you know, that break is meant to run, high five the spouse, grab a glass of water, spank the kids, discipline, whatever needs to happen in those 2 minutes, and then we can all run back here. The last thing I wanted to do with everybody, so you don't have to unmute for this, but it's kind of a mini pledge. So I was hoping that you guys would feel comfortable kind of taking it with me. So if you could, however you make your pledges, I, and then insert your name, on my honor, promise to get multiple opinions on sales before deploying any one person's advice. I understand that sales is complex and that good sales advice can only come with context.
Oh,
Okay.
I completely agree on that one. I have 3 other founders I got to run them by before I talk.
Yeah, that's good. Well, either which way, you know, like I said, I'm speaking broadly about sales, but without context. I don't want anybody to grab something and run with it without ever, you know, getting more context put into it. And then it ends up doing harm. I hope that would never happen, but I want people to get multiple opinions. On top of it, I'm one sales guy. So this is one perspective. Okay, guys, so we have gotten the fun stuff down, the rules of engagement. Let me also just say something. If you look at this picture, it says order and chaos, but chaos is slightly tilted and it makes it look like the whole picture is tilted, which is just very haunting. I'm sorry, I just wanted to point that out since it says order and chaos. Okay, so guys, I need to fess up to you guys. So I think that talking about the basics of sales gives the perception that this is going to be the 1, 2, 3s or the ABCs, or maybe a discussion about how to introduce yourself. Well, the Guise is we're going to go a little bit deeper than that. Why? 70% of all sales training is forgotten within 1 week. 70%. 87% is gone within 1 month. And we're talking sales training. So typically corporate sales training with days and days and days of content and structures. So I think of it like a skill, and it's almost like yoga, for example. If you want to get more flexible day to day, we need to stretch a little bit. If we want to get comfortable flying at 3,000 foot, let's pop up to 5,000 foot for just a little bit, just to make sure that we're comfortable with those airspaces. The last thing is this is being recorded. So I hope this becomes a resource that you can come back to as you need, as you're developing your sales and as you start practicing more. Okay, the fun stuff. Oh my gosh, guys, I am so sorry. I am very nerdy about this type of stuff, so you get to deal with that. Ah, so exciting. Okay, so we need to describe how we got here, or discuss how we got here. Sales has changed, and purchasing decisions, how people think, has all changed, and a lot in the last 100 years or so. So the first era of sales that's recognized in recent history: prospect and persuade. So what this was, think about penny stockbrokers in the 80s and the 90s. So some guy would call up, say Jason, for example, he'd be like, hey, Jason, I'm going to make you the richest guy in Wisconsin. I got a feeling about this one. What's it going to take to close today? So that was a lot of prospect and persuade. The second era was consultative selling. So consultative selling, it was a really good development in sales because it introduced asking questions to accounts. The problem with consultative selling is that it didn't really do anything with those questions. It was ask broad questions to show them that you care about their business, and then introduce your product and talk all about that. I was actually trained on consultative sales with my first job. We did a thing called value, challenge, and impact. And what we would do is we'd ask the client, what do you value? What challenges are you having getting that? How does that impact your business? And regardless of what those answers are, is immediately after we ask those questions, start talking about the product. So the next thing, not so much an era, but more of a framework. And we still see this one in existence today. This is hunting and farming. You might hear of these. It's more of a framework than anything. But where this came from was the insurance industry. So early 1900s, insurance companies were looking at their best policy writers. They would notice, hey, they do really, really good and they explode. And then all of a sudden they plateau. What's happening? What they found is that their best salesmen were getting bogged down managing all of the policies that they had already signed. So at some point they decided to cleave the sales force and have the hunters, the people that were really good at signing new policies, do that role, and then others manage the current policies. So the final thing we'll talk about in history, and then we will move on, is the current era. So the current era, there's debates about what it's called because we're currently in it. People are fighting for the narrative around that. I agree with calling it the complex sale. Mainly we think of things: digitization, globalization, the accessibility of solutions. Think 60 years ago you had a problem, there might be one solution in town for that. Nowadays you Google it and there's 14 solutions. Also increased complexity in both business and personal decision making as far as purchases. Okay, so I apologize. Let's hop into this. So the next thing we're going to talk about is why people buy. We're kind of unmasking this part. If you had watched Mike Pritchard's seminar not too long ago, he hit some of this too. So this is coming from a sales book. The stats are a little dated, but they still prove the point. It's more about the point around these. So why do people buy? So it turns out, based on a survey, 53% of people buy based on the sales experience itself. 38% buy on the outperformance of competition, the brand, the product, and the service, and 9% say that they bought because of price. So when asked, what was the sales experience? What about it? What caused you to do that? Top answers were, the rep offered me a unique, valuable perspective on the market. They help me navigate my alternatives. They provide ongoing consultation, and they help me avoid landmines. So in reality, it's more like a partnership where the salesperson was acting in their best interest and eventually became an ally and a resource. So this leads us to kind of this statement here that it's not what you sell, it's how you sell. Okay, so this is kind of a fun one. So a lot of us think of sales or decision-making as something very logical and rational. As it turns out, it's something that's much more emotional than we've been giving it credit for. So let's see here. Down here at the bottom, we have sadness, of course, which is low arousal and negative feelings. We have low arousal, positive feelings, that's contentment. So yeah, I'm doing okay today. Negative high arousal, we have anger and anxiety. And then high arousal, we have awe, excitement, and humor. I believe that the author of this missed one. Anyone want to take a guess? Nope, no takers? Okay, all right, I will tell you the answer anyways. Hysteria. Ah, yes, okay. So if you ever sell your product by getting somebody positively hysterical, I am so excited for you. You get a high five from me immediately or a hug or something like that. That is amazing. Doesn't happen often. I haven't heard of it, but point being, these are our different emotional states. We need to recognize these. Please stay away from hysteria. That's all a joke. So this next thing, you're gonna have to pardon my ADHD, but I promise we're gonna relate it back to sales. Okay, who here knew that humans can outrun horses? Did anybody know that? John knew that? Okay, anybody else? Any takers?
Yes.
Ah, yes, okay. Did anybody not know that, I guess is the better question. Okay, all right. Man, that information got around quick because I feel like 5 years ago, this was like a mind-blowing thing that was okay. Awesome, so turns out, yes, absolutely they can. The human body has been designed to. So if we look at this, there's a race in Prescott, Arizona. It's called Man Against Horse. We look at the #1 guy. He lost the race against the horse by 3 minutes. That's it. But he beat out 14 other horses. So this was called persistent predation, right? So chasing animals persistently until the animal could no longer run or anything like that. And then that's how the hunt ended. So turns out with persistent predation, it was successful about 50% of the time, and it yielded 70% higher yields than bow and arrow. With a standard hunter and gatherer society on a bow and arrow hunt, just a short burst of going out and trying to hunt, 0.034 animals per day or 0.022 animals per hunter day, about 1 animal every month and a half. Whereas persistence predation, if you wanted to go run 30 miles in a day, 50-50 chance you were getting an animal that day. So now let's talk about cold calling. Promised I would bring it back. So keep in mind that instead of hunting prey, we're chasing to help. So this next part, I'm not going to lie, this is kind of one of those unmasking things. It's going to feel a little bit ugly at first, but we're going to talk about it and we're going to deconstruct that and it'll all be okay. So with cold calling, I apologize, there we go. You will fail more than you succeed. You absolutely will. There's not a single doubt. I wish that I knew people that had even 50% success rates with cold calling. Does not happen. So you think about the adoption innovation curve. John and I had this exact conversation earlier this week, so I should have cited John right here. But you talk about the adoption innovation curve. Let's say that we're thinking that it's even going to be innovators that'll take a cold call. 2.5% of them, 25 calls per day, 20 days per month, that's 500 calls a month. You get that 2.5% to actually agree. That's 12.5 successes, whether it's a sale then or a meeting or something along those lines, depending on your objective. But right, you see that the math boils out. This is extremely tough. So walking into it, and we'll disarm that here in a second. I will tell you why that's okay. So walking into a cold call, let's start diving into it. Immediately, sales, as the salesperson, you're -1, the client is 0, right? That's the scoreboard walking in. Think about it though. You just came in out of the blue. They had no awareness of your even existence. And all of a sudden, boom, you're right in front of them and you're wanting something and they know that. 2, nobody, I shouldn't say nobody. Lots of people don't like sales. Sales has gotten its own rough perception, and sometimes that's been by the behavior of sales professionals. That's tough. That's something that sales constantly needs to reform and work on. But regardless, that perception's there. We deal with that, and we need to acknowledge it. The other thing, we're dealing with the croc brain or the reptilian brain. So when something pops up in front of somebody out of the blue, immediately it's your reptilian brain kicking in, right? Saying, is this a threat or is this something I should investigate further? So immediately their arms are up, and that's okay. Let's talk about some no-nos around cold calling. First off, mispronunciation of names, right? Immediately triggers the croc brain. Second, rapid fire delivery. If you have an answer quicker than they can finish the question, they know you're trying to sell them. And like, you're not there to help, you're there for your interests of selling because you want to. So croc brain. Hard scripting. If your answers sound like lines, it's a big cue. So key questions we need to answer for the customer to disarm the croc brain and get out of the croc brain space. First, should I be talking to this person? Second, is this call relevant to my situation? And third, is this something we should discuss further? So those are the three things when you think about structuring a cold call. Those are the elements to think about hitting. Okay, so this is kind of one of the fun things about this presentation that we'll talk about, but we are going to do some things called Rainmaker Rules. So Rainmaker Rule number 1 is pre-plan every call, and that includes cold calling. So pre-call planning is really simple. Write down your objective, what you're trying to accomplish, who the person is, and why, answer those 3 questions ahead of time. Why should this person talk to me? How do I make this call relevant to them? And how do I make it something they want to discuss further? So map that out. Okay, guys, the fun stuff. Even more fun. Right before your calls. So remember this whole emotional state, right? We have contentment right there. So if we're just hanging out and we're not doing much and we say, I got to go to work or whatever, and we're fine with it. I mean, we know it's a work day. And then we say, I'm going to make some phone calls, and then you start dialing. So if we know that people need to be in some sort of excited state for good decision making, how can we expect to lead them out of that if we're in that ourselves? So as hokey and as cheesy as this sounds, you do need to get hyped up before you do anything that you're going to do in sales. It's not about being erratic or anything like that, but it is about getting your state elevated so you can speak emphatically about the things that you're passionate about and that you care about. Okay, so always do tongue twisters. There again, as silly as it sounds, it's okay to stutter. It's okay to falter in your speech, but mumbling isn't good. There's a difference. So shifting your own state. I actually want to open this up because I'm curious if I can learn any new tricks. So I will give you guys a couple of mine. First off, the song Back in the Saddle Again by Aerosmith. Absolutely great. Great emotional elevator. Any of the Good Works by Cardi B. Absolutely. Other ones, clapping your hands really hard. Kind of like a stinging clap, or your thighs. That's another one. Get your adrenaline going. So you guys, go ahead and turn off your mics. Let me know what you do. Or turn on your mics.
Well, you're assuming we do things.
Oh, don't you?
Like the normal thing that happens with startups in their sales process is I ask them how many they talk to, and they say, I've talked to a lot. I talked to 3 people this week. And so, your assumption of volume is unlikely to be true. And so perhaps we can seed the question with, as a salesperson, how many calls are you expecting to call in a cold call session? And how many sessions are you doing a day?
Okay, so we will talk about that. Actually, there's part of this built out around scheduling and how to structure all of that. So I guess even if you're doing 3 calls a day, if you're doing it in a contentment state, then it is time to think about doing elevated states. John is absolutely right, and we will hit this in the scheduling section. The goal is to do, say, 25 to 50 calls per day, depending on what your line of business is. Certain services who hire reps, they require them to do 150 to 200 phone calls a day. So lots and lots. The point behind getting your emotional state elevated and pairing that with your scheduling is to do bursts through calls. So if you're going to make 50 phone calls in one day, if you can set up 5 sessions of 10 phone calls per session, and then get your state elevated before you do that, because you're going to get told no left and right by probably 8 of them, a maybe on the 9th, and a kind of yeah on the 10th, maybe. The point being is you keep your emotional state elevated so you burst through those calls, and you can handle that rejection with your elevated state. That was a good point, John. I guess anybody else do anything, or if not, any other questions?
I think visualizing the call before you do it is important. I mean, for me personally, like just kind of figuring out your surroundings, and, you know, thinking about, don't overthink things, but thinking about what the responses are going to be, trying to get into their mindset as well. And, you know, once you have that, I think you're ready to go.
Okay.
Yeah, I've
got a comment on that. I've done a lot of executive training in developing countries, and the stratification between the management and the workers is astonishing. I mean, it's, you know, people living on $2 a day working for somebody making a couple $100,000 a year. And what we realize is we always have to prepare in advance. What are the words that this group of people want to hear? What are the words that make them go, okay, I'm listening? Because if you're talking to the worker out there on the production line and you're talking about, let's increase profits, they don't listen to you anymore.
Sure, absolutely.
And what they want to hear, though, is they want to hear about pay. They want to hear about safety. So you've got to understand, like, you know, what are the 10 key selling words that make them pay attention to anything? And it's totally different between the different groups.
I'm leery about the words, and we'll hit on that in a part coming up. But I agree with the overall creating frameworks of what's important to them, and we'll talk about some of that framework stuff about, you know, what are the metrics that a manager's, you know, held accountable to, and part of the stakeholder analysis behind that. We'll for sure touch on some of that stuff. I definitely agree. Okay, so we will run back into this real quick and keep going. So the actual call, we just got ourselves amped up, right? We went through all of this. We're talking heli-skiing, explosions, bungee jumping, RPMs at like 6,000, all the good stuff. So then we get into the call. And what do we do immediately when we get into the call? We slow it down. We slow it down way, way down. So I naturally talk fast, if you can't already tell from this presentation. I should probably slow down even on this. But either which way, when you enter a phone call, and there again, we talk about the Croc Brain, immediately, if you start chattering off very quick, a couple things are happening. 1, you're flagging, hey, this is a danger. 2, I can't even understand what this person's saying. So when you introduce yourself and you go through those initial steps, take a deep breath, nice and slow, and also don't be afraid to pause from time to time. So we talked about, you know, crisp speech and doing those tongue twisters, but there again, it is okay to use your own voice and to speak your own language the way that you typically do. Again, no mumbling, but stutters, things like that, okay? Because above all else, you should be expressing trust and authenticity in your calls. Beyond that, another thing to build into frameworks is intrigue and reinforcement. Reinforcement comes into play with letting the account know that the ball is in their court. You're not trying to push anything on them. It is their decision. They already know this, but by saying this sometimes, it disarms them because they recognize that you know that as well. You're giving them permission to something that they already own, but it has a disarming effect. So focus on frameworks more than scripting. So this is where, you know, I kind of diverge from the buzzword part, but your frameworks should be more built around how do I put intrigue in this? How do I express benefits related to their issues? And how do I establish that relevance? more so than, here's a cadence of sentences that I'm going to do. And I'll explain why in just a second. So the call is supposed to be about them, not you. So when you call, don't start rattling off, I have this great whatever. If you do, you're going back to era one, which was prospect and prosper, right? So why we focus on frameworks more than scripting is because the best sales come from asking questions. So you build your framework of the things you're trying to accomplish, the intrigue, the reinforcement, the trust, the authenticity, as well as establishing who you are and what problems you help. But then you start asking questions. So if you have a hard script and you ask questions, it's going to throw your script off because you're going to get different answers, right? So that's why this is one of the big things that I think has changed in cold calling. There are tons of people that still disagree with me on this. That's fine. But this is what some of the sources I read follow up with. And for me, this has worked best. Also, establish follow-up expectations. So if the call is going well, you get through the questions, you establish that relevancy, and they want to continue to talk. It can be as simple as, I'm sending you an email this afternoon. I'll call you back tomorrow morning, something with a time and a specific action. Lastly, on your call, do not spill all of the beans. They're going to ask you, what product do you have? What does your product do? You don't want to describe it all to them right then, because if you do, it's going to be pretty easy for them to dismiss, and you will never get that. You likely won't get that opportunity to show your product in full over, say, a 15 and 20-minute conversation. Okay.
So what you're saying is don't try and pack in everything that they should need to know about it in the early stages?
Yes, no, do not. No. And we will go through that in the phases of the sales conversation as well. But there again, it's about the intrigue part of it more so. So expressing to you, one, that this is relevant to you, two, that we've established that you have X, Y, and Z problem. And three, I work with this kind of vague piece of technology or whatever that handles all of these problems. But I can explain it to you if you give me a little bit more time, in a certain commitment.
Got it. Thank you for clarifying that, Gage.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely.
So
Okay.
Sorry.
Go ahead, Jason.
One of the questions that I've had as far as the different sales calls that I've done is that slowing down is not really, it's not an issue. Most of the, a lot of these initial sales calls that I'll have will go for an hour length of time. It goes into an incredible detail. And I'm not really talking about my product per se. A lot of times it's targeted to academic professors, and they love to talk about their research. I've actually had full 45-minute presentations on their research project, which I believe they are using me as a test run for their next major presentation. How do I if you're trying to shoot to hit 25 calls a day, you can maybe do 2 or 3 of these or 4 of these a day before you're just kind of get a little loopy with this. How do you kind of put the limits on this so that you can get through this and figure out what you need to figure out without getting into that?
If you're spending 45 minutes with somebody, I would call that a sales. Okay, let me differentiate. I would call that more of a sales presentation or a sales call. This is cold calling. This is prospecting work. So this is more about setting appointments or getting initial traction. So these are very quick calls to accomplish something in a short amount of time, where a full-blown sales presentation or sales call has different phases, and you go through all of that. If you do 4 sales presentations, if I did 4 sales presentations in a day, I would get a nosebleed because they're, I don't want to say exhausting, but it's a lot. There's a lot that goes into those. But we will absolutely go through the sales conversation as well.
Cool.
So our second Rainmaker rule, guys, always be on high receive. This is one of my favorite ones. This is a very important rule. So this is the difference between listening and waiting for your turn to speak versus listening to the question, understanding, and then pulling information and giving them an answer. So there again, kind of the difference between scripting and hard scripting, but making sure you're taking time to listen to what it is that they're actually asking. The second thing about high receive is sometimes you'll be in a conversation and they'll mention a name or a resource or something that you should know or that they expect you to know that you don't know, that you need to write down immediately. So you need to be listening for things that can come up just super quick. My last thing around this Rainmaker rule is don't use a keyboard to type your notes while you're on the phone with somebody, because it sounds like a telemarketing center. I always use handwritten notes. So we'll talk about that post-call as well. Okay, so let's see, the next one.
Gage, I have to ask that because it's so efficient to type your things while you're doing it. Can't you just put them on mute and go? No, Nathaniel's shaking his head.
Yeah, I would say no. I would say no in part because, you know, one, you're kind of signing yourself up for tech issues in part. Okay, so sometimes I'll prospect and say it's somebody at a director level and I have 38 seconds on the phone with them and stuff is just happening really quick with information. I'm asking those big questions and they're telling me things that I need to be pulling metrics from. I need to be understanding context behind. You would be shocked at how much information can come in, you know, just that small amount of seconds. So I get that typing's faster. I recommend to people, if you're going to take paper notes, get better at shorthand, but the mute, the unmute, the keyboard, all of that stuff, I would guess for most people it would be more distracting than helpful. If it is the only way you can do it, then I guess it's better than no notes. But for me, I would say no. But if it's the only way someone can do it, then it's better than nothing. Okay, so this is an outline of an example of an intro. So I'm not doing a hard example of, you know, but this is the pre-call plan where to discover if the prospect has a problem I can help with. That's one of the objectives. To establish relevancy, which we talked about. To provide insight and establish rapport, and to get a commitment of some sort. So you do your hype and dial. In a cold call, I keep mine very to the point up front. Because again, I recognize, you know, you're dealing with that Croc Brain. So I'll engage with the Croc Brain for just a second until it gets a second to move away from the Croc Brain. So introducing yourself, your company, and your relationship to that person. You can say, we don't know each other, we met, etc. Giving a quick pause to allow them just a little bit of time to process. An explanation of what problems your company solves. And then you can start with questions. As you go with the questions, I'm tying it back to insight and intrigue, and then establishing expectations for follow-up. So right after you do your cold call, there's a few outcomes. So number one, voicemail or hang up. So remember that innovation curve with the innovators, the adopters, all of this stuff. Here's why this isn't scary. These guys just did you a huge favor. They did not waste any more of your time. They weren't going to be your customers. That wasn't going to happen. So when someone hangs up or tells you immediately not interested, that's okay. Not only will you get used to it, at some point you'll start appreciating it because it keeps things out of your way. There's kind of a different level where people will give you semi-positive cues where you'll spend a lot of time chasing it and it will never come to fruition. This is way worse than the hang up or, you know, won't answer. Let's see here real quick. So if you get a voicemail or hang up, very okay. If somebody says, send me information, for me, a lot of times I'll put them on a cadence because there again, that's kind of a soft maybe. I don't know if I've seen a lot of those pop out to some sort of excitement or ready to engage. It can happen. The other one is, like I said, getting more commitment or time specific for follow-up. So actually getting them to commit to that, or perhaps even a sale if you're doing a type of business that sells, you know, right over the phone immediately. So the to-dos after you've called, immediately document everything that you talked about, questions, metrics, answers, names dropped, things they care about, favorite color, whatever. Anything you talked about that you think is relevant information, zip it down and right away while it's fresh. Send any follow-up emails before the end of the day. And this is an area where you can really help out. You can make a promise to people. John, I promise I will send you that email with that information you just requested before the end of the day. Before 5:01 p.m., it will be in your inbox. That way I built trust by making a promise and following through on it. If you get an appointment after a cold call, confirm every appointment at least 48 hours before. And while you do, doesn't have to be long, doesn't have to be much, add another teaser or a little more intrigue to keep that up. The last thing, if an appointment is a no-show, this is going to seem really counterintuitive for some people, do not apologize. Nope, we'll talk more about that later, but we'll talk about rapport versus relationship building, but it is very important not to come in overly apologetic or things like that. We will talk about that more, counterintuitive, but for now, just know if somebody no-shows, you don't owe apologies. So tricks, tools, and considerations. This is the first part of this. I promise I want to only give you guys 2 tools and then walk away. There's more tools towards the end. The first one is industry reading. Anybody I know in sales, I've been told this 1,000 times. I try to tell other people this 1,000 times. If you can dedicate 15 minutes per day or up to a total of an hour per week of industry reading, not even specific to your product, but say specific to the people you do sell to. So let's say you sell to, I don't know, mechanic engineers or auto engineers, and then you pick up auto trade or whatever it may be. You may read about the industry broadly, but this will help you a lot. In part, it'll change your small talk from, hey, how's your kid Timmy, to all of a sudden, what do you think of this rule change and is it impacting you? The other thing is it improves your questions. So when you're asking questions in your cold call and later on in your sales, you'll be able to ask better questions, more tailored. And when you get asked questions, you'll be more resourceful. So I highly, highly recommend, it's probably one of the most important things, do some industry reading. The next tool, this is one of my favorite ones. Okay, Rainmaker Rule, here we go. And it gets a hurricane. That's how important it is. We're not talking drizzly, we're talking hurricane, baby. Okay, use the points system. So when I've worked for companies, they all had historical data. They knew how territories performed. They knew how many orders they should expect and what good growth would look like. How do you know that in a startup, right? And same thing, you know, like if you've only been making a few calls per week, how do you know how your sales activity is impacting your sales when you're just starting from scratch? So the point system is super simple. Say your goal is 25 points by the end of the week. The points are as followed. If you get a lead, a referral, or an introduction, that's 1 point. Getting an appointment to meet the decision maker, 2 points. 3 points for meeting them face-to-face, and 4 points for getting a close. So you start figuring out all of the stuff that it's going to take to get 25 points per week, and you'll start changing your behaviors to adapt to that. As you go, so you implement this, you collect the data on it and see how it's trending towards your actual number goals. So like, what revenue am I trying to hit with my startup or things like that? Adjust it. So you can say, hey, I was hitting 25 points every day and I'm still not hitting my revenue goals. Okay, great. Bump it to 50 points per week. The point behind all of this is it's establishing a baseline on your sales activity. It is a baseline metric that will give you something to start with. Okay. So the next one, we're going to move into a little bit about crafting message. This is very broad and general. Again, mind you, I am a sales guy. I am not a hard marketer, so this is general. So the do's and don'ts of crafting your message. The don'ts, these are just immediate no-nos. Introducing your product as we're kind of like. I've heard people say that from time to time. If you say we're kind of like to a customer, the first thing a customer is going to think, well, then why shouldn't I just buy them? They're the experts in it. They're the original one that did that. Info dumping, like what I'm doing right now. No, I'm just kidding. To an extent. Info dumping, sending an email that's 4 pages long that describes everything about your product, from the birth of the idea until now. Overused words. If you take a look to the right-hand side of your screen, you will see these numbers, the number of times these words have been used. These are just in press releases. So you can imagine that in emails, it is like 90 times worse, if not more. So leader, leading, best, top, unique, great, solution, largest, innovator, innovator, or innovative. Another don't in any of your message, focus only on your company or your product. If you need to talk about the problem, you need to talk about the symptoms they feel from that problem. Another one, using apologetic language. We kind of talked about this before about not apologizing for no-shows, but in part, it's status setting. Your time is valuable too. Their time is valuable too, and your work partners. If you are constantly apologetic or something, it sets a different dynamic where behaviors that force you to apologize become okay, if that makes sense. Last thing, don't spill all of the beans. Don't give all of the details about your product. We keep talking about intrigue, but that's how you keep people drawn in and hooked until you can get them to do the action and eventually get to a close. So the do's of crafting a message. We talked about this before: establish relevancy, provide insight, fuel intrigue. Emphasize the problem. What's the problem? One of the things is a lot of people don't know they have a problem. You created a solution for a problem. Do they know they have that problem? There's a dissonance in that, and we'll talk about that in a bit. So dangle the carrot, do spoon feedings. So we said no info dumping, a cadence of spoon feedings. Another one is called features and benefits. There's a saying in sales, features tell, benefits sell. If you can do anything where it talks about the benefits and leave out a whole bunch of the features, that's a good start. So we talked in the beginning about why do people buy? These are the top reasons why influencers recommend. So a little bit different. They look at professionalism, unique and valuable perspectives, which we keep talking about. Do not overstate the value or understate the difficulties, avoiding landmines, and they educate me on issues and outcomes. Last thing around this, so we talked about that emotional state, right? And we had positive, negative, we had awe, excitement, all of that stuff. This is from a book called Contagious. And what they say is when we care, we share. I know it sounds a little cliche and cheesy, but everyone knows the story of the Trojan horse. Most people know the story of Susan Boyle. I think most people know that one. Singer, became very famous, got up on stage. And I don't think a lot of people know what Golden Palace is. Some may, because a lot of us are in the business setting. So Trojan horse, right? Story of betrayal or heroism, depending on what side of history you want to stand on that one. Golden Palace was a lady that renamed herself goldenpalace.com. And then Susan Boyle, we all know that story as well. But the point being is everyone cared about Trojan horse, and it became a story that got passed through and shared because of how emotional it was, how triumphant, or however, provoking it was. People didn't have the same care for Golden Palace. So don't always think about what you're saying to your customer. Think about how your customer would describe it to somebody else. Okay, let's see. So this is a little bit of a heavier one. We will cover some of these metrics also in a little bit later of a section. And then right after this, we can hop into a quick break if you guys want one. I know there's lots going on. I guess before any of that, does anybody have any questions right now while we're still on do's and don'ts? John, go ahead.
So for me, I'm wanting to have the conversation about the sales funnel and what it is that I'm trying to accomplish along that path. Mm-hmm. That the sale is not, I call and then they buy, but that there's a path to building. Mm-hmm. And I'm not hearing that context yet.
Oh, sure. Yeah, no, we got more slides for sure. We'll be getting to sales funnels here in just a second. Any other questions about the content we've covered so far? Nope.
One thing I think is important if you're having any type of cold call is if you can find out something personal about the person to connect with that has nothing to do with your product or your company. So the reality is that most people in most companies, there's other companies that sell similar things. So if you could find a way to connect with them on a friendly level, that could be the thing that really pushes a client over to choose you versus someone else.
definitely, yeah, good rapport building. John, go ahead.
Will you be talking about how, when I'm going in to call someone, it's good to have context. Your industry reading was the broad context, but do you do anything about preparatory context before you cold call, or am I just calling random numbers out of context, or do I research the person and his LinkedIn and get into his mind first?
That is the pre-call planning. So
Okay.
figuring out the person, their background, their position, what their position's measured by, metrics that they use in their position and metrics they're measured by, all sorts of those things.
So how does Larry do that? Larry's got a beautiful idea. He has no idea what a customer looks like.
Perfect.
How does he do that?
There's a slide about stakeholder analysis coming up in the very next slide, actually. Man, John, you're right on cue. Okay, awesome.
Thanks, John.
Okay, so pre-call planning is like, I don't know, definitely a cousin or a very close relative of stakeholder analysis. So pre-call planning is about the call itself, but to have a good pre-call plan, you need to know your customer, right? So this stakeholder analysis is way more B2B focused. I apologize, but that's what I have the most experience with. So for a stakeholder analysis, number one, talking about the customer's personal and business objectives. What are the things that matter to them most, both from a personal perspective and a business perspective? So what are the critical success factors? So what are the big things that have to happen for those objectives to be met and take place? Third, what are their job responsibilities? What's the day-to-day? What does that job description read like? Fourth, we talked a little bit about metrics, but what are the metrics that their bosses measure them by, that their department's measured by, and that they use in their everyday job to do their work itself? Metrics are so important, and every company, I mean, you're kind of tripping over metrics with a lot of companies. So 5, distance in relationship to other stakeholders impacted. So do they work with other stakeholders on other projects that are affected by the problem? What does that chain look like? Who's in their network? Who do they work with, and why does it matter? On any given one of these, if there's any point at which you can also do the 5 whys, it's a great thing to do. And you can do, it's called a fishbone diagram, but you take the question and you build it out. So keep adding your whys and build out from there. Let's see. The other thing is upstream and downstream. So this is more of a process-oriented question, but let's say your solution is right here in the process. Upstream, how does that problem affect those people? Downstream, how does that affect those people? Odds are you'll find a lot more impact downstream, could be upstream as well, but those are other stakeholders that are impacted by this. So those are other people you should take into consideration. The big thing too, you do your stakeholder analysis, and as you get a few stakeholder analysis from different customer groups, you can start looking at the commonalities between those stakeholder analysis and then start asking the questions, where do these things converge, and are there mediums that are similar within this? So the obvious ones, trade shows and conferences, blogs, forums, publications, but there may be special podcasts or something even deeper, a layer deeper that you didn't understand. Doing the stakeholder analysis really helps you flesh all of these things out. Okay, so a little bit about metrics. So for the approach strategies, these metrics are still important because it's how you gauge how well you're doing at these approach strategies. So with prospecting, honestly, most sales metrics are really, really simple. So prospecting metrics, your call stats, your email stats. The big thing, documenting how much time it takes you to do these things. Time is arguably the biggest resource in sales. Average value per lead. So we'll talk about testing here in just a second, but being able to calculate your lead sources, where you get these things from, and how much those are worth per lead. And then customer acquisition cost, which we won't have the answer for that until later, but it's important in prospecting as well. Yes, John?
So I have lots of people that want to sell me leads. And so how am I going to calculate what the lead is if I don't know what my conversion rates are along my sales funnel?
Yes, we will get to that.
All right.
Okay, so funnel metrics, John, and this is, John, you're going to be so disappointed because this is the quick version. We're still not even actually to the full funnel. One day you will look on your PowerPoint screen and you will see a real funnel. It's going to be so exciting. It's like a few slides away, but we're getting there, John. Okay, so funnel metrics, things that are important. One is your dry run rate. This is how many times you do a full-blown sales presentation versus how many times it closes. This tells you a lot about your messaging in those actual meetings. Time metrics, again, we talked about this. We'll talk about this in the customer funnel, but your total time for your funnel. Funnel stage conversion rates. I know John's just like chomping at the bit now. He's like, see, this is the intrigue. I won't give John all the goods, so I'm making him wait for the next slide. And then customer acquisition costs. Okay, so another big thing in approach strategies is split testing. So what this is, you take your messaging, your emails, your scripting, your frameworks, whatever it is you want to improve, split it up into a few different groups. I sometimes call this burn to learn. Sometimes you have to go through leads to learn more about your customer base, but you set up 2 experiments. So it might be trying to figure out, is this subject line better? How many open rates do I get with these? So you send out 25 emails with the 2 different subject lines, and then you figure out, hey, this one got a 90% open rate. This one got a 6% open rate. Okay, now I have a good subject line. And you kind of chase your way down the path that way. John, another question.
Naming a rabbit hole for Larry. So this is assuming, Gage is assuming you know what your product is, you know who your customer is, and that you're testing your capacity to deliver on that promise. Larry doesn't know who his customer is yet. He really doesn't know what his product is yet either. And the customer discovery process has the same structure that you're talking about. You know, break it up into groups of 10, clearly identify the subgroup that you're talking to and run an experiment to test whatever, right? But we're in customer discovery trying to listen rather than in product sales trying to deliver down the step, right? So there's similar sets of words that we use with slightly different nuances that are worth naming a little bit.
But it's even closer than that, John. And like, here's why. Because if we're taking away all of the goods about the product, we're not divulging tons about the product, and we're really just talking about the problem and the benefits behind what our company does. It's almost the same as what you're doing because you're not talking about the product either. I mean, you just happen to not know what it is. We know what it is, but neither of us are really talking about it. So really, that outreach is more about confirming somebody having an issue, and then, you know, the things that it would take to solve that issue. So that's awesome.
And understanding, having them tell you the benefit that they want that they can't get.
Mm-hmm.
And then you say, oh, but I have that.
Yeah.
Let me show you.
This is exactly, I've had I've been kicked under the table 3 times by my other founder, Chris, saying, you need to pay attention because we can solve that problem. And you thought it was a trivial problem to solve. And that's, you know, like we can integrate databases together in a blink of the eye. And I thought that was trivial. And it turns out to be a $200,000 problem for some of our clients. So we produce, I know I'm trying to stay away from what the problem we solved. And because it's really deep, because it's a new technology, now we're commercializing it. And so what should we focus on is in this new, in our service is most valuable is what we're finding out. I assume data quality was important, but actually when you get deeper into it, it's why do you have data quality problems? You know, and that's usually the bigger one for B2B. So B2B is fine to me. It's that they want to merge, like T-Mobile needs to merge 14 databases together and it's a pain in the ass. Okay, sorry.
No,
But John, you're hitting on the nail there, the difference there.
So in my mind, the discovery process never truly ends.
It isn't. It's different shades.
Yes, definitely.
Perspective.
Bert, did you have something you wanted to say? You're on mute, Bert.
No wonder you didn't hear me. Okay. I'm married to a PhD epidemiologist, and big numbers are a thing, you know, and I have to I can't let this one go by. Split testing is exactly the place where you want to get as big a data set as possible because you're looking for valid stats.
I'll disagree only because it depends on how many leads you have. If I have a product and I only have 300 potential customers in the United States, I can't afford to burn 150 learning. But in B2C, you're absolutely right. Get big data sets, great, if you think you have a big customer base.
Okay, fair enough. There you
think
go.
about how many leads you have. Yeah.
Okay, I agree with that qualifier, but it's really good to make sure that if you do have the potential for getting a lot, and one of the nice things about LinkedIn is that you can harvest lots of, you know, very good profile, depending on the business, but you can often harvest a lot of names and profiles quickly, run down their email addresses, and, you know, then you can pull, you know, 1,000 people with a bunch of split tests. And that's very effective at finding out what works.
Okay, guys, let's see. Any other questions? Okay, we'll hop into the actual sales conversation. This is the good stuff. John, I'm still not giving you those funnels. Man, this actually worked out really well as far as an example about intrigue and making people wait. Like, John, yes. Thank you, John. Okay, so the sales conversation, phases and roles, pre-sales convo, the phases in action, the close, and post-close. So some people call this the pitch. I don't love the pitch, but either way, that's all personal preference. So we have roles that we're supposed to take on as salespeople when doing a sale. So the first role is the detective. I apologize. Let's back up to phases. There are 5 phases to a sale: intro, discovery, diagnosis, design, and close. We'll hit these pretty quick going through them in these upcoming slides. But the roles we play, number 1, there's the detective. The detective's about asking good questions. So that diagnostic selling, getting to the root of what their problem is. There's the doctor. The doctor, first rule with the doctor, do no harm. Your sales should not cause harm to somebody else. You're selling to help somebody. The second thing with that is giving a good diagnosis of the problem. And then the third role we play is the banker. So don't do anything against the business interest of that person. And then the last one is the best friend. And what that is don't give any advice to somebody you wouldn't give to your best friend as a salesperson. So pre-sales convo, we kind of remember why people buy, the sales experience being 53%, outperformance being 38%. We have everything written down in our pre-call plan. We've got our emotional state up and our hype. And then we remember there again, our pre-call plan and our high receive. General rules. And so Elizabeth was asking about this. About 2/3 of your conversation should not be about your solution at all. Not at all. Also, if you do that, or if you do what I'm doing right, it's called alligator repping. It's when sales reps just come in and do this and they just explode all of this information at people. That is a huge no-no. So you lead to your product, you don't lead with your product. And with that, the biggest thing, it is better to be memorable than likable. And this one's kind of confusing to people, but insight comes from challenging assumptions. Challenging an assumption is a form of conflict. So there's a difference between rapport, which is a working relationship based on respect, versus relationship building. Relationship building, honestly, even today, you talk to most people in sales, they'll say, oh, it's all about relationship building, oh, blah, blah. The problem with relationship building, when it's a one-sided effort, becomes a problem, or sorry, a act of reducing tension. That's constantly what relationship builders do. To keep the relationship okay, I'm going to reduce tension. So when a customer pushes back on the insight or the value of your product, you reduce tension and you clench up. It also leads to premature discounts. It leads to people chasing too long. So big thing here, better to be memorable than likable. Now don't walk in and call.
Better to get to know than to maybe.
Yeah, definitely. So the intros, those are pretty straightforward. Your names, what your position is, I mean, more of statements there. Brief recap of your prior contact and how you got to where you're at in that conversation, why you're there. Establishing your role, so explaining I'm the CEO. I always explain I'm the consultant. My job is to support both parties in this. Goals versus agenda. I think it's always better to have goals with a meeting and establish that up front rather than an agenda. And then a segue to the discovery. So with your intro, your segue there again, this is where this industry reading comes in. It changes your small talk to things that are relevant to their job. And you can tie this in to your next phase, which is that diagnosis phase where you ask those questions. So you can start with little tiny questions here that seem irrelevant and build them into bigger questions. Another Rainmaker rule real quick, don't ask questions you don't care about. If you don't care about their kids, if you don't care about their baseball game, or if you don't care about, don't ask it. And the main reason being is people can smell the inauthenticity. Odds are if you don't care about it, you're going to call their kid by the wrong name, or you're going to misremember something. Like, it's not a very honest approach, and people can smell it right away, and it'll throw you out of the sale quicker than anything. So in the sales conversation, our discovery phase, the saying is right people with the right questions in the right sequence equals a quality decision. So you use open-ended questions and you let them talk. This is that 2/3 where you're not even blurting out your product. So 2/3 open-ended question, letting them talk. You use conversation expanders in there. So some of them are, tell me about your processes, but the best convo expanders are things like, tell me about ... What would be an example of, or how often does XYZ happen? Those are really good combo expanders because it lets them broadly go out and talk about whatever they want to talk about, and you can get to their problem quicker, or at least the symptoms. In your questioning and discovery phase, 2 things should be happening. 1, you should be asking questions that you're unaware of the answer. You don't know the answer to that question. But 2, you should also be confirming your assumptions. And then last, remember, be on high receive. So the diagnosis phase, you guys probably wondering, okay, Gage has not let me talk about my product yet. He keeps telling me, no, don't do that. He keeps telling me to ask questions. He keeps telling me about all of this intrigue and insight and blah, 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 blah. Well, the point is we've been building right up to this, the diagnosis phase, the most important part. So here's the quick dissonance, and here's why we've worked our way up to this way. So you guys build products for people that have problems, right? Okay. Would you consider your products important enough to where, I mean, it's a relatively major problem. I mean, whatever the problem is, it's dysfunctional to that person to have that problem. Awesome. So do most people think that they're smart or good at their jobs or doing well at whatever it is that they do? Really? Most people don't. Most people wake up in the morning and be like, yeah, man, I just suck at, the things I do all day. Okay. All right. Well,
70% of people hate their jobs.
Okay. No, hate their jobs, but do they think they're smart or good at them or know what's going on with them?
They think they're smart, but
Yes.
they don't necessarily think they're any wrong rabbit holes. I'll shut up.
Okay. Okay. Either which way, there's a dissonance. People can't think that they're good at their job or be on top of their game or think that they know more if they have a major problem. So there's a dissonance right off the bat. Your people don't know they have a problem, and thus far, anything that has led them to any indication that there is a problem, they've used their Croc Brain to run away from it. So all of this has been a giant task of you getting them to this point to open up, and you just used all of those questions to get them to describe the symptoms of the problem that you're there to solve without ever mentioning your product, and you got them to admit that there was a problem. So the diagnosis phase is, boom, dropping it on them and providing that diagnosis. Hey, you answered all of these questions. Well, guess what? All of these questions are symptoms, and all of these symptoms lead to this disease state. I hate to be the one to tell you, but you have XYZ. So the big thing, like I said, revealing the problem in an insightful way, tying the language back to their own answers. You're using their words. And when they start asking questions back to you, it's a really good sign. They're engaged. They're accepting the diagnosis. At the end of all of this diagnosis phase, you get what's called FUD, which is fear, uncertainty, and doubt. So we think of that emotional state that we've been talking about this whole time. Well, guess what? They are in fear and in anxiety over here. They just got a diagnosis. They know they have a problem now and they have no clue how to solve it. But guess what? You're there and you're still in your sales call. Okay. So we're here. Now we want them to get them here. This is the good stuff. This is my favorite part. Okay. So features, benefits, and impact. Features tell, benefits sell, impact paints the picture. So you explain the feature of your product, you explain the benefits of that product, and then you explain what the impact of that benefit is. So, John, I'm going to sell you a coffee mug warmer so you will never have to get up from your desk. The benefit is it keeps your coffee hot all the time. And the impact is it means that you can do more of these Zoom calls with Gage. Boom. Like, that's how you tie all of those together. Also tie back to those symptoms of that diagnosis. This is also your opportunity. And mind you, this is the whole time you're talking about your product. You finally got to that point. Highlight the distinctive features of your product. This is where you differentiate from the competition. This is your chance to do that. So we have X, Y, and Z feature. So my recommendation with this, for the best way to do this, start with your tangible benefits or your tangible features and benefits. So feature, tangible benefit, impact. You start with those and you end with an intangible. The reason you end with an intangible, so mind you, this whole time they're going up because they're getting excited, the light's at the end of the tunnel, this diagnosis isn't that scary, they have a solution. But when you end with an intangible, you're capturing an imagination. As silly as that sounds, because you've laid out the feature, you've laid out the benefit, but if the benefit is intangible, it can be whatever it is. So say, for example, I'm selling a product that's eco-friendly, but I can't put a metric on it. There's a few things behind that. John, this will give your company an eco-friendly edge that will help you disrupt your competitors. Second, you will save birds, bees, and butterflies while doing this. And third, above all else, it'll make you a good person and up your image in the community. Boom. So you captured their imagination, you moved them to this emotional state, you ended with an intangible benefit, you talked about your product, and you solved their problem. Boom. Okay, so the close, what does it look like? Oh, goodness, guys, the stakes are high, the heat is on, the pressure is up, now we got to land the plane. Oh, so good, so many assumptions. Odds are, you already did it, you just didn't know you did it. So the reality is most people make their decision whether to buy or not in that diagnosis phase. They've already made up their mind. You're just wrapping things up. Remember, these are the things that they said they wanted in that sales experience. You gave them unique insight and challenged assumptions. Boop. You gave them a diagnosis that they were unaware of. Boop. You highlighted your distinctive features, navigate alternatives, and you provided a solution and helped. All of it. So actually ending the call, very simple. Quick recap, acknowledge their ideas about it and their status. John, it seems like you were really excited about this technology. I'm glad I could help you figure out that problem, but I'm also glad I can be here to help you with it. John, I know you're excited about it. I'm excited about it too. I would love to work with you. Is this something we can do business together on? And then you establish your expectation for follow-up. John, I will speak to your assistant tomorrow morning to pick up the purchase order, and then I will call you before Thursday night just to make sure everything's smooth and sail and you're all good to go. If no close, if it didn't work, you can either go back to the questions or you can reduce the risk. I hate this one, but it is an option. You can offer a warranty, you can offer a discount or something like that. If the person's right at the edge, you pull the risk and sometimes it works. Not a fan, but you can, it does work. There's the hard close fallacy. So this one is person wouldn't take no for an answer. This is a fallacy. You should not be doing this. If you browbeat somebody into submission to get them to buy your product, that whole hope of having word of mouth spread your product around just died really quick. They're going to end up with buyer's remorse, and it's a bad situation to be in. You also violated the do no harm clause of the doctor.
And you also generated a negative word of mouth, which is 10 times more effective than the positive word of mouth.
Yeah, definitely. Okay, I promise, guys, we are getting there. We are getting close. Okay, so dry run or a non-pitch close. Consider things if they say, hey, Gage, I don't have the money now. Ask, when's your money coming up? Schedule your calls for then. Consider alternative channels. If you're calling B2B on a director, well, odds are there's 10 other directors that could apply for that as well, or could be applicable for that. Create a cadence for follow-up short and long term. If you have a dry run or a dry pitch and they're just not going anywhere, create a short-term cadence for urgency, but don't create a midterm. You can drop out that midterm. The long term is just to check to see if anybody has changed jobs or if anything has shaken up in that account to readjust their urgency to come back. Ultimately, consider the opportunity cost. So there's two sayings in sales. The first one is learn how to cut bait or fish. Stop fishing in fishing ponds with no fish. You're wasting your time, your energy, your money, all of that. Second one, always be leaving. Get out of there. If it's not going to result in a sale and you know that and you're in this purgatory of email niceties, time to go. Okay, so we kind of started with one of these. We're getting close. I'm going to ask you guys if it applies real quick. So they did this research study on baboons, and they were curious, how do these troops move? There's 120 baboons. They move all over the place. It's like herding cats, right? Like, so as you can imagine, let's see, with these little guys, they just zip around like that. Yeah, just running around. So how do you get a group of 120 baboons to move in a concerted direction? I mean, right, they're always together. They move around, they roam. Who here, by raise of hand, thinks that it's the alpha that decides where they go? No? Do you guys already know the answer to this question too? Do you? Okay. Jay, what is it, Nathan? Tell me.
I really don't. I was just kidding.
Oh, okay. Okay. So what they found is, and they do GPS tracking on them to figure this out, when one baboon moves in a slow, consistent, steady pace with an even heading, the whole troop follows. These little erratic movements that just zip around don't do anything. It's a slow, and it's, baboons are highly hierarchical, and it's not the alpha. It's anybody within the troop that moves in a slow, consistent behavior can get the troop to move. So I'm going to plant that seed now. I want you guys to think about how it applies to sales, if it even does. We'll talk about it in a second. All right, John, you are one. Look at this. Oh, sneak preview, John. Did you see the funnel? Okay. So we're running into considerations of sales orgs, and I promise I will get you guys out of here really soon. So a couple quick considerations. Like we talked about, inter-organizational relationships. As your companies grow, these are things you might want to keep an eye on. Sales and marketing is a spectrum. So sales over here, marketing over here. There is a difference as to when and how they come into contact with the customer, but they both have very similar goals. Sales and operations, this is a tough one. So they have two completely different objectives typically. Operations typically is trying to tighten efficiency, where sales is asking for freedom and customization for customers. So it's something you have to watch, that there will be a lot of infighting on that. For your sales environment, consider it keeping it very nebulous and adaptable. So it needs to be a learning environment, not just for you as the company, but for your reps as well. It's all a continuous experiment, and it's all just made up of tiny little experiments. Salesforce morale, this is a tough one. Okay, so sales people have been told their whole lives that they're talented and special. So naturally, it can kind of make them prima donnas. Some are really talented, I will admit that. But long story short, if Salesforce culture ever starts to dissipate, you can have kind of colony collapse disorder within a sales organization. It can get bad really quick. So just make sure that you're minding those things as your company grows. Another huge mistake I see all the time, good sales is not indicative of good leadership. So a lot of times people will say, I have a really good salesperson here. I want to make them a sales manager. I want that behavior replicated. And then that person gets to be a sales manager and they crash and burn and the whole team quits. And it's because they weren't a good leader. There's huge difference. Lastly, be careful what your comp incentivizes. So at one of my old companies, we had a product that was like, the saying was, this will get you famous, but this will get you paid. You got awards for this, but you got paychecks for this. So is John missing the funnels? He is, isn't he? Okay. Let's see. Let's open it up to questions. What questions you guys got? I promise we'll keep it short.
I agree more with you about that whole, just because they're a good salesperson doesn't mean that they're a good manager.
That works in computers too, and any industry. Just because you're good.
Could you go over those intangibles that more examples of those intangibles where you end a sales pitch?
Yeah, sure, absolutely. Let's see here. Or you already did it. The close. Okay, so let's brainstorm some of these. Okay, so. So intangible simply meaning something that cannot be measured, right? A benefit that does not have a metric to it. So think of something that is beneficial, you know it's beneficial, but you simply lack the ability to measure it.
So I got a question here. So would that be not future benefits of your product, features of your product? It would have to be back to you were talking about saving the environment, but it's not something, a future point of your product that's going to be delivered or.
No.
Okay. So that when you said intangible, I'm just wondering, are you talking about future features?
Nope, I apologize. So these are benefits. So intangible benefits.
Happiness. You get happy.
Well, no, for sure though. But like, it might be freeing you up to be able to do something else. Like, and that's kind of tangible, but there's lots of intangible ones. Shoot, I apologize. I'm coming up short. So there again, think of something that just can't be measured. Does not have a metric on it.
Like the joy of driving a car.
Joy is a good one. Yeah, definitely tying into that like emotional thing. I'm trying to think of more intangibles.
In my business, one of the intangibles is we try to teach people that sustainability is actually about improving business performance. So you don't dump as much shit into the environment and pollute as much. And when they realize oh, we're not polluting as much, they go, I can even tell my kids that actually this is something that I'm doing to make the world better. It works really great. It's much better than quality management or saving money.
That's the share and care motif.
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. I completely agree with sustainability. I think that that's a really good example. I mean, you do have tangible measurements, like if you want to measure air particulate quality or something, right? Sure. But the broader, also, being a global citizen, right? Like in corporate responsibility, that's another good intangible benefit, saying we can't measure this, but you're going to be able to talk about it.
Yeah.
Now I have another question, which is one of the reasons I like Salesforce, the company, is because Mark, what's his name, the president, is absolutely committed to sustainable development. And in fact, he's done a bunch of big initiatives on it. What do you think of the Salesforce product? It's got a funnel. It's got a lot of these type of metrics on it. I'm just curious. You work in the business. I'm interested in what you think about that product and in general funnel type products.
So we're going to talk about funnels right now. John, you left right as we were turning to the funnel page, and I had to wait for John.
Baited switch there, Bert.
Okay, so we'll talk about CRM stuff here in just a second. So there's a couple surprising things about CRM stuff that I'll tell you. Okay, so first thing, full disclosure, I have not read R for Pirates and the metrics behind it. So I can only speak from my B2B customer funnel and metrics that I found useful. What I did see about our pirate
I put it's a video, it's a 5-minute video. I put it in the chat.
Sweet, awesome. Okay, I will be sure to watch that too. Okay, so I won't be talking about our pirate metrics. John, was our pirate metrics B2C oriented, or do they say it's broadly
It tends to be B2C oriented.
Okay, because
Tends
what
to
I
be-
yeah.
Tends to be aimed at SaaS companies.
Okay, gotcha. Yeah, when I was looking online at some of these models, I was like, man, this seems very heavily oriented on like internet you know, how many times you get views and all. Okay, so my customer funnel typically looks like this. You know, when you have qualified prospects, once you are actually starting to approach those, your first pitch, additional and hierarchical pitches. So let's say that the only way you could get into an account was by starting with a manager and you have to go through a director to get to whoever. Pilots and phasal implementation. So we're getting a commitment or we're close to getting that commitment, but they're, you know, they need the product to do whatever, and then closed. So that's a funnel I work with. The other thing I'll say about funnels are maybe broadly applicable to B2C. I feel like B2C has a lot of flexibility to share tools and resources. I have always customized customer funnels specific to, you know, whatever sales process I was working with. So back into those funnel metrics real quick. The ones that I've always found most helpful: customer acquisition cost. So all your sales and marketing efforts for this whole thing divided by how many customers you actually got. So getting a nice round number there, and your customer payback period. So how long is it taking from you getting money back from your customer to pay that off? Revenue per customer, which is also kind of a broader company one, and lifetime value. The time metrics. So no joke, any place you can slap a time metric in between. How long does it take to get from approaching to pilots to first pit, et cetera, et cetera. Those are all just simple time metrics that you should be looking at processes to dial those down and tighten those up. The dry run rate, we talked about that. So a pitch versus an actual close. How much time am I wasting talking to people who don't care? Funnel stage conversion rates. So not just the time, but what % is getting through. Especially in prospecting, we kind of talked about that. I'm not gonna lie, I'd be super mad if I dropped a lot of money and say only, you know, 0.2% got through to the next phase. And then I went back through and I found that, you know, cost per lead value, and I wasn't making money on it, right? So something to watch out for. So your funnel stage conversion rates and how quick everyone's getting through each thing and the number at which they do. A general metric, I feel like this is a general rule. This is kind of like the 5 whys, but except of a metric for me. You just can't use it 5 times. So for me, anything that's a rate of change. So for example, in your split testing, not one experiment versus the other, but how much better are you getting at experiments? What's the change between the progress in your experiments as cohorts? So you know, am I getting better at this? Like, we can have one experiment versus another and see an improvement. But when we start seeing groups of experiments doing better than other groups of experiments, and we're starting to see that we continually get better at groups of experiments as we do them, that's kind of a cue. I'll show that on a graph here in just a second, but questions on metrics. John, you were so excited about this.
Yeah, so the fundamental realization in the B2C world that I got out of the Pirate metrics is the first 3 steps are content. And so when we're talking about the process by which I engage people in the process of customer discovery, I can do that before I've even built the product. So I can do the first 3 steps of the sales funnel before I have a product figured out in the B2C nominal case, right? Mm-hmm. And so I think that's also true even in your place, right? When you're talking about qualified prospects, I think that process of getting awareness about what you're doing and what their problem is has a whole collection of we'll call it marketing content, which gets you to the right person at the right time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I completely agree. I don't know. There again, like the discovery phase for both. I mean, whether it's you know, startup discovery phase versus sales discovery phase, they're so similar. I mean, I wouldn't say identical twins, but definitely twins. Okay, so
the hard part is that one of the twins has a product hammer in their hand and won't let it down, and the other one doesn't have a tool in their hand and is willing to listen.
Yeah, honestly, I guess ever since starting to hang out with you startups, I guess the way I've thought about it is like the sales is just the validation of your discovery work. We're going to find out how good of a job you did at discovery. And that's just the way it goes. Okay, so go ahead.
Well, this is 2 cents in because I come from a very, very technical world, and watching this, I would say I wear my professor hat a lot, and my professor hat would be because people want me to explain things. What did I just, why did you put that math up there, and why are we going to spend $10 million on that math? And then they go, oh, okay, we'll put the money as long as we make X off of it. And so I end up doing too much information. So what you really want to be is a mystery writer and tell a mystery story here, and just slowly keep the person in there to the final plot, and then so that they go down the journey so you can get to the diagnostic phase, and then you can say this is you're going to either get killed or you're going to be buy this product and you'll be fine. So it's an interesting.
Yeah.
It's an interesting psychological pivot, because we're finding out that we're starting to talk about symptoms now. And because before I was glomming onto, well, we can do this, we can do that, we can do that. But the truth is we solved the underlying problem, and these are all just symptoms of the problem. And we need to talk about that. And that's where our value really is.
Like, it's just like real patients in healthcare. Most people don't know that they have a problem until it becomes something that is extremely disruptive to their day-to-day functioning. But most patients are getting sick for a time period before they're actually sick.
Well, this one's even a 50-year-old problem, because people assume that data quality is, which is right now what IBM says, 60% of cost in your budget and time, and people just accept it as a normal thing. And they think the CPU is done and the GPU is done. And I come from a world of where we actually build different computational models. And so this is sitting down at some of the core things. And when you do come up with a different core technology, we even program it completely different. But this is an interesting thing coming from the lab now to commercialization.
Yeah, definitely.
I'm sure it's good for me.
So, sorry, Larry, we're going to hop back in here. That way we can wrap up for everybody. Okay, so we talked about all of these metrics. Here's kind of why. So John and I had a conversation earlier this week about, when do you start thinking about actually hiring somebody, and like when, to do sales, those things. So I don't have an exact recommendation, because there again, it's all about context. Any advice is bad advice until it has context. So take a look at these metrics over time. This is all free-handed. Apologize, I'm not an art student, but you start seeing your customer acquisition cost and your customer payback periods improving. You start seeing your funnel conversion rates improving. You start seeing your dry run rates decreasing. You start seeing your channel improvements. So all of these metrics are indicators that you're honing in, and you're starting to figure out what your market is wanting and where your market is and how it's adopting your product. Where it comes in to decide to hire a sales rep is it's an onboarding and a learning time. In the B2B world, in my last 2 roles, they said it takes on average 9 months for a rep to get up and going and profitable. So the other consideration in this, actually 2 things. One, my kind of stance is the company needs to understand all of this and be doing well at all of this before they start bringing in reps, because you're kind of putting all your eggs in one basket, hoping that this hired employee can just build your revenue. The second thing is you need to be able to consider how many reps or mistakes can you afford to go through when you do hire someone, or how long of a training time can you do and still be okay as a company. Because if you hire one sales rep and they quit 6 months in, or they just aren't who you thought they were as far as sales capabilities, how many of those mistakes can you afford? So I would make sure that you have a decent amount of cash flow to hire either additional personnel or change personnel or whatever it may be. Okay, so let's see. I promise, guys, I did not intend for this to go as long as it is, but we are so almost there. Oh, things to consider when hiring. Make sure your rep has a good attitude, high emotional quotient, because remember we talked about that emotional state. The interview, they had better nail their interview. Sales pitches are giant interviews. So why a salesperson who doesn't, a salesperson needs to be able to nail their interview. That's kind of just a basic test. Presence, they need to be able to command a room regardless of their status and other people's statuses. Motivation, watch out for this. A lot of people used to hire sales reps thinking, I just want people that are money motivated. Well, that's not quite true, and that can mess with your morale. Some people are cause driven, some people are money driven. So make sure to respect both in your hiring processes. Make sure that your rep is the type of person who would take ownership for their failures and have problem solving skills. Okay, guys, we are so close. We are so close. Okay, the last tricks, tools, and considerations. So let's talk about that CRM. Up front, I'm going to tell you, I am not the biggest fan of Salesforce. It's been a few years since I've been on Salesforce, but my experience was with a large company. So we'll talk about that. That's your guys' advantage, honestly. If you think about how Salesforce or other CRMs are adopted, those tech companies go to the directors, the vice presidents, the managers of those companies. They sell them on why it's so great. Those managers, VPs of sales, so on and so forth, pack in all the metrics that they want. And by the end of the day, it just kind of becomes this thing that the sales rep has to do. The other thing in this, you'd be shocked. I have worked for a company and I know tons of companies that have a lot of good reputation that use Microsoft Excel as their CRM. So the adoption of big CRMs in corporate America is still way behind. So if you want to talk about sales and your guys' advantage and your edge, this is one of them. Watch your workflow when you buy a CRM. Your CRM will dictate almost all of your workflow. So if you have a problem with your CRM and you end up hating it, well, guess what? Unless you're ready to change all of your workflow, you're gonna have to make do. Make sure it has easy testing and sequence testing and metrics reporting. So make sure you know what types of experiments you want to do when you're shopping. That way you can pick the ones that meet that the best. There again, we talked about manager metrics. Make sure that your metrics are actually measuring things that are important rather than just kind of the vanity metrics. Individual customization, depending on what you're selling and how you're selling, make sure it customizes to what you need. Quick thing, sales calendar. So we talked about those bursts for your cold calling. What's best, or at least what I've found is best, is set a very tight schedule. Every day should have at least one thing that's completely consistent. So your morning meeting, you align for 15 minutes, spend 45 minutes calibrating your CRM, getting it dialed up for the day. This is organizational communication, handling your own stuff. This is a quick burst. So these are people I called yesterday and I know I can catch them right in the morning if I just burst it out real quick. And then you do 1 hour sessions. I usually book 7 to 10 calls per session and whip through as many as I can. I get amped, stoked, ready to go, ring, 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 go, 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 go. I always book a catch-up session because you will get behind. In sales, inevitably, stuff will pop up, and that's a good thing. You just need to be able to buffer it. Let's see, this time zone is either a session or prepping for lunch and going to a lunch appointment or doing something along those lines, and then wrapping up. The best thing I found for cold calling is a software called FocusMate. It pairs you up with another person randomly in the world. You're on webcam, they're on webcam, you both mute. It's like a study buddy. It holds you accountable to sitting down at your desk. You state your goals at the beginning, they state theirs, and at the end you tell each other how your goals did. It is shocking how the smallest amount of social accountability will make you do your 25, 50 calls a day. All right, last bits. I don't know much about. Yeah, John.
Go back to the focus me. You sit live on camera with some other person that is having to do cold calling too, and the fact that you're watching them watch you keeps you focused on doing calling.
Oh, no, actually you do anything on FocusMate. So you could be reading a chapter in your course textbook and I could be doing my cold calls. It pops up just like a Zoom call. I say, John, here's what I'm doing. Gage, here's what I'm doing. We both mute. It counts down for 50 minutes. It's a 50-minute session. And then at the end, we just tell each other how we did. But there again, it is probably one of the neatest tricks I've seen in software as far as social accountability. It has a profound effect, and everyone on the site. I mean,
because there's 2 eyes watching you.
2 eyes watching. That's all it takes to keep you planted. Okay, I do not know much about these. I just ran into this like last week. It's on my list to look up. If you're sending out emails, you're going to get a bounce rate. You're going to get a spam rate. It's not uncommon for my bounce rate to be like 18 to 20 some odd %, and that's not uncommon at all. An email warm-up service is a software that you pay into. They send about 10,000 dummy emails back and forth from your email to their server per day, and it legitimizes your email address. So the big fish like Microsoft or whoever you're calling on, it won't flag it as spam as often. Of course, industry reading, I cannot express that enough. And the final Rainmaker rule, earthquakes don't count. This rule is simply about holding yourself accountable to the success of your sales and not being allowed to make an excuse about it. It's a mentality thing. If you start letting yourself make those excuses, I'm fine with owning failures. I'm not fine with making excuses, right? So they don't count. And I always thought that this was a joke when I read this, and then I lived through a global pandemic, and I was like, oh shoot, maybe earthquakes really do count. Because I had quotas through a pandemic too. Okay, how does it apply? Anyone wanna say anything to it?
To the whole presentation?
Nope, the baboons. Remember? They move in troops, and it's the little one that just moves in a straight line and doesn't matter what their role is or anything like that.
The one on the left looks more focused. The one on the right is busy being argumentative.
Astute, Nathaniel, astute. Anybody else? Okay. So to me, this whole baboon thing is really just a story of a couple of things. Concerted efforts, confidence, consistency, both in messaging and in action. So guys, the last thing I need to do is say thank you. Thank you guys so much. I know this was a lot of time. I know I went really fast. There was a lot of content, but I will say that being able to present about sales makes you realize your own, skills you need to sharpen. So this has actually been probably more helpful for me than you guys, but I really appreciate it. And I think we can move on to questions if there are any.
Just a question on the closing section.
Yeah.
When you believe that it's in the diagnosis section of the whatever your process you call it.
Yes, I do. Yeah.
The question is, if at that point you're in the discussion with said client or prospective client, you feel as if the conversation is still very ethereal, much more in the clouds than on the ground. How do you bring it back to the earth?
Wait, I'm so sorry. Could you repeat that one more time?
So let's say John and I are having a business call. John, I want to get your money. Well, Nathan, what is it you're selling? We're really good on this. We're really getting close. We're at that point where it's literally like, I've addressed the problem and the concern. I want to get this money from John. John is still kind of waffling on me, and I haven't really felt that I've really closed, but I'm not ready to make an ultimatum at any point in this discussion. I'm just enjoying the rapport and the dialogue. I want to close concisely, professionally, and respectfully. There is still a kind of feel to the conversation. How do you bring it down?
Yeah, so here's what you miss in it. So if we go to the diagnosis phase, I apologize. So a couple of things. One, you may not have asked enough questions. So John, odds are if he's still waffling, either A, he doesn't acknowledge that he has a problem, or B, it's not a problem big enough for him to care. So you either go back to the questioning and start bringing that up, or you go back to the diagnosis phase, recommunicate, and there again, by the end, if it truly is a big problem, you get FUD, right? So the best thing,
That
okay.
answers that question.
I will tell you too, if you ever,
I'm sorry, I had another question.
Oh, go ahead, yep.
So the other question you were talking about minimizing risk.
Yeah.
Reducing risk.
One that you highlighted, you said, do not do. You're really not a big fan of. Are there any other alternative options?
Yes, there are. And okay, so I shouldn't say do not do. I just don't like it. I'm not even saying I'm not above it, because there have been times where I've offered a trial or things like that. Like if I thought, especially if I thought that it would lead to more sales, like
Right.
with
If
that
you
specific
take the
person.
discount for the initial, long term in the back end, you're going to make it.
But if it's a one-on-one thing and I know John's only going to buy from me one time and he starts asking for a discount or whatever, I'm probably going to say no. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to pivot back. I'm probably going to ask a couple more questions, and then I'm going to reiterate the value of the product. And I'm going to stand behind that with that whole, it's better to be memorable than likable. I'm going to say, John, you know what? I would love to be able to dole out, you know, reduced rates anytime I wanted to, but we have a good value here and we know that. So I have to stand behind the
Just to
price.
stand behind the product. That's exactly what I'm saying. In a respectful manner, it seems to be the better strategy long term.
Yeah. Yeah.
So the fundamental question that I'm expecting someone to have asked is this basically one of your top 3 problems? Because if the thing that you're talking about isn't one of the things that's interrupting my sleep, I'm not the right customer yet.
Right.
I'm not. It's time for me to go somewhere else and say, let me put you on the newsletter, and when you're ready and you want this, here's how you buy on my webpage, right? So a lot of the sales thing is a chromographic resolution on whether this is a person who has a problem urgently needs to solve now, or one that they have the problem but they're not ready to solve it yet, or whether they, you know, are unaware and they need to do, you know, sort of remedial training to even be aware, right? So there's maybe, in fact, different products that I'm selling to different people, which are basically different people at different stages in their journey around the problem, around their understanding of the problem.
Correct.
Yeah. I don't know. Like I said, usually there again, if you hit this phase, you know you did all of the other ones right. And you also should be able to tell as you're doing the sales call, because there again, we're talking about those emotional states. You should be able to perceive if that person's getting in an excited state, especially if it's somebody that is like an engineer, or sorry to bag on engineers. I love y'all. You guys are great. I would not have roads to drive on without you guys. So thank you. Anyways, sometimes people will come in with what's called an analyst frame. So let's say John's coming at me and he's like, Gage, I want to know the metrics and how does it blah, 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 right? And he's just hitting me with these hard questions about product specifications and very tangible outcomes with metrics tied to them. One of the best ways to break that framework is to pause and tell a personal story, because an analytic framework and a personal, believe it or not, like, and a touch of humor in that, but it breaks up that framework. It's hard to keep an analyst framework with humor and personification, if you will.
It's kind of a disrupt.
Yeah. So, like, I kind of told Jason this the other day, but like, I don't know. If you asked me what sales is about, most people say sales is about relationship building. I don't agree. I think sales is about conflict, and it's about constructively using conflict. You challenge assumptions, which is a conflict. You stand your ground, you command respect at an equal status, and you do all of these things, but you can do it tactfully and with couth and with respect and rapport. But when you walk away from that sale, they end up way happier. They respect you way more. And it ends up being a better, cleaner transaction for everybody. So, all right, guys, that's all I know about sales. I'm sorry. That's it. I alligator repped for 2 hours.
Thank you, Gage. That was very useful.
Thank you. This has been very good.
Thank you guys so much. I really appreciate it.
Gage.
Yeah.
So take care, guys. Bye.
Here.
Thank you.